Imagine if there was a country where people talked about killing you and others liked you as if it was just a normal everyday job, where they debated the ethics of destroying your country, your home and your livelihood for money, and those from that country who claim to be on your side, who claim to be your allies, contrary to trying to change this, to trying to discourage others from joining up to do that to you. Instead, actually reinforced and normalized the idea that that was just fine, and told those who were thinking about signing up to do all of that they would bear no personal responsibility for it, and that actually it's basically as normal as getting a job at McDonald's. How would you feel about that? That's what this video is about. There's a problem I've noticed continuously for many years now. A tendency among many Americans who consider themselves to be left-wing or progressive or something adjacent to those things to excuse Americans in the military murdering or facilitating the murder of some of the poorest people in the world, and using arguments and logics that can only be described as exceptionalist or supremacist to do so. They propagate a rhetorical framework that excuses murder. This has been on display quite a lot, particularly recently, due to some controversy surrounding a Democratic Party primary candidate for U.S. Senate in Maine, named Graham Platner. He's a proud and unrepentant former U.S. military soldier who spent nearly 20 years of his life occupying Iraq and Afghanistan, with his last stint in 2018 being as a private military contractor for the notorious Blackwater mercenary company. But that's not actually why he's been in the news. Rather, it's because it was discovered that the guy had made sexist and racist Reddit comments 4 or 5 years ago. And then on top of that, it was discovered that he had a Nazi SS Totenkopf tattoo on his chest. Now, the US Senate race for the state of Maine is not important. It's not the sort of thing that I would ever usually talk about on my channel. Regardless of the result of it, absolutely nothing is going to change regarding US government policy in any respect. But what is important is how the reaction to this controversy has brought to light once more this elephant in the room regarding significant parts of the left in the USA. They have serious difficulty conceiving of non-Americans as human beings when that conception comes into conflict with what they view as the material interests of themselves and other Americans, to the point that they'll go as far as defending proud and unrepentant participants in some of their country's worst atrocities, and act like choosing to sign up for the military to kill people or to help kill people for Western imperialism should be considered a normal job that no one should ever be judged for. Seriously, they talk about killing poor people on the other side of the world like it carries the same gravity for them as waiting tables or flipping burgers. Their support of Graham Platner and their willingness to just blatantly lie for him, to whitewash his history and how he feels about it today, reveals this probably more than anything else I've ever seen. And that's why I'm making this video. This reaction to him is the perfect opportunity to examine this common dehumanizing supremacist attitude that is normalized in a not insignificant section of the American left wing, or at least the self-described American left wing. As examples of this phenomenon, we are going to be looking at 4 prominent, self-styled, left-wing and or progressive political commentary broadcasts that have been engaging in this sort of behavior. The Majority Report with Sam Seder, 2 of the hosts of Breaking Points, Ryan Grim and Krystal Ball, the largest self-described left-wing political streamer in the USA, Hasan Piker, and the podcast Chapo Trap House. This video was made possible thanks to my supporters on Patreon and Ko-fi. If you like it and you'd like to see more like it, consider heading over there and supporting me yourself. Let's begin with the needed context. Platner's military history and the way that he discusses it today. He's completely unrepentant about it, and brags about it often. He mentions being a combat veteran constantly, like it's the defining thing about him, the thing he's by far the most proud of about himself. So, what did him being a combat veteran entail? Well, he signed up for the US military, specifically to the US Marines, for the first time in 2004. His own reasoning for this was that he really wanted to experience war, and after engaging in extensive research, he decided that joining the Marines and helping to invade and occupy Iraq was the best way that he could do so. We're going to be revisiting his reasons for joining the US military in more depth later, but for now, trust me when I tell you that the full context is even worse than this. By the time he joined, it was already long clear that all the justifications for the invasion were lies, and evidence of the scale of the crimes that had been committed was widespread. Platner saw all of that and apparently thought it was awesome, so he decided to sign up to go kill Iraqis firsthand. Platner's deleted Reddit comments confirm that this is indeed the case. In this one from 2020, he answered the question, "Why did you enlist in the Marine Corps?" by saying, "Wanted to have an adventure and kill people. Joined up in 04, did Fallujah and Ramadi, and manage both. Hell of an excellent experience." So quite clearly, by Platner's own admission, 16 years after the fact, the reason why he joined is because he wanted a consequence-free opportunity to murder people. And he had an excellent experience doing so. He enjoyed it. Keep this in mind throughout this video, because you're going to be getting whiplash at the way that some have defended this guy and lied for him given this stuff. His first assignment was as a guard at the notorious Abu Ghraib prison, where the US military detained and tortured random Iraqis indefinitely without trial. He describes his experience defending the camp from Iraqi resistance fighters attempting to liberate their compatriots from a literal American torture camp like so. "This was my first real taste of combat. I loved infantry combat. It was like this kind of high-stakes game where everything you do matters and you need to make decisions under immense amounts of stress that are going to impact both your life, but more importantly, the lives of your men." So that's a quote from an interview from September 2025, after he'd already had 20 years to think about what he did and reflect upon it, where he reminisces about his time guarding a notorious concentration camp and killing people who were attempting to defend their own country from an imperialist invasion. There's no somber reflection on how messed up it was that he was even there, no regret for having harmed people, no talk about the Iraqis who were the real victims of this invasion, or how he deeply regrets what he did and wants to atone for it. No, he still talks today about killing desperate Iraqi resistance fighters, trying to liberate their compatriots from a torture camp that he was guarding, like it was a fun game. For him, those people's lives was something to take for the thrill of it while getting paid for the privilege. In 2020, Platner even posted body cam footage that he had kept of this engagement to the Combat Footage Reddit forum, bragging about it and seeking praise from strangers for it. After his first so-called tour of Iraq, by the way, isn't it messed up to call going overseas to massacre people on the other side of the world a tour, like it's a vacation or something? Platner enjoyed it so much that he decided to sign up again and go back for seconds. After that, he returned home and started studying in university for free, a benefit the US government gave him as a reward for killing poor people in Iraq. But in spite of having been handed this golden ticket to get an education and start a career outside of the military, the prospect of working an actual normal job just wasn't doing it for him. He preferred to kill poor people in the global south, and so he tried to rejoin the US Marines for a third tour, but was rejected this time, because new Marine policy excluded people like him who had forearm tattoos. But Platner was desperate to go and kill more poor people, so he didn't let that deter him. He joined the US Army instead, and then went on his third tour of a global south country being occupied by the USA, this time in Afghanistan. There, he claims in this interview that we've been going over here, to have finally seen the light and become disillusioned with American foreign policy. He was so disillusioned that he decided to return to Afghanistan in 2018 for a fourth tour, this time as a mercenary for the notorious Blackwater Mercenary Company. In all of Platner's reflections on his time, occupying other people's countries and brutalizing some of the poorest people on Earth, they scarcely even warrant a mention. He instead focuses almost solely on the impact on himself and other Americans. And he talks about how great the benefits that he's received in exchange for killing people for the US empire have been for him. Welfare payments, healthcare, free education. The Iraqi and Afghan people don't even merit a mention, except of course to frame them as dehumanized insurgents who deserve to be killed by American invaders like himself. Not only that, but it's abundantly clear that he believes that his time in the US military makes him a special class of person, which is why he brags about it and flaunts it constantly. Platner is so sadistic that in one of his resurfaced Reddit posts from 2020, long after he claimed to have started questioning US foreign policy, and 2 years after his stint as a Blackwater mercenary, he fantasized about how much he would have loved to have participated in some of the most brutal massacres in American imperialist history. He said he would have gladly volunteered to participate in the Native American genocide and the Vietnam War, along with a plethora of other invasions and colonial occupations. Notably, he didn't say that he would have liked to fight the Nazis or the Confederates. It's all colonial occupations and genocides of non-white people. Situations where he would have been in a position of vast power, fighting against ill-equipped and desperate people just trying to defend their homes, with civilian populations pretty much entirely at his mercy. American leftists and progressives have been doing a ton of whitewashing of Platner. They've been framing him as something that he simply is not, as an anti-imperialist military veteran who is repentant and regretful for what he did, and is now committed to righting his wrongs and opposed to imperialism on principle. Yet what we've gone over shows that this is a blatant lie, constructed out of thin air to run cover for an unrepentant and enthusiastic mass murderer for the American empire. There's a certain point where the idea that someone is reformed is just an insane proposition. Like a murderer who killed one person in iffy circumstances. Okay, maybe we can say there's something still there with that person. But a serial killer who killed 19 people in the same way, maybe at that point we should be thinking about our quest to redeem this person. And that applies perfectly to Graham Platner here. Because we're not talking about someone who went to Iraq for one tour and then realized that what they were doing was horrible. We're talking about a guy who went there, loved it, went back 3 times over the course of 20 years, who still brags about what he did and reflects upon it fondly to this very day. Backing someone like that in their bid to become a left-wing elected politician in a position of actual power and influence is kind of ridiculous. Rather than trying to make them one of your leaders, you should actually feel unsafe even being in that person's general vicinity. That's a serial killer. Ideally, in a world where Iraqi and Afghan lives were considered equal, he'd be in prison. But in lieu of that, the least that we can do if we truly consider Iraqis and Afghans to be equal humans is to not get behind someone like that, who's seeking a position of influence and power when his entire life has been defined by willingly and remorselessly murdering and oppressing some of the world's poorest people. Platner is an American equivalent of an Israeli soldier who happily volunteered to go back to Gaza 3 times, or a Nazi soldier fondly remembering his many years of combat against resistance fighters who were trying to liberate concentration camps. It speaks to a deep dehumanization of people in the global south by Americans when they're killed by Americans, that so many of them see these circumstances differently, that so many are rightfully in this very moment recognizing IDF soldiers as the disgusting scum that they are, yet seem to find it so easy to excuse this guy and others like him. American leftists often have this obsession with redemption, and it just so happens that this redemption is always very easy to afford to people like them who brutalize people who they view as not like them, and those who they insist are redeemed haven't actually done anything at all to merit that label. It's way more often than not similar to Platner's case. It's people who've never apologized, never acknowledged the gravity of what they've done, and they've certainly never come close to engaging with their actual victims, restituted them, or been forgiven by them. Quite the opposite, actually, because Platner is still bragging to this very day about what he did to his victims. And God, did he ever enjoy it. He really wants you to know that. Yet they're still happy to lie and pretend that he's repentant and redeemed, all because his platform says that he wants more government benefits for them. Platner's actual victims don't merit any consideration. They're just as unimportant to them now as they were to Graham Platner himself when he pointed his weapon at them and pulled the trigger. There is a clear difference between Platner and the profile of what an actually repentant American military veteran would be. Someone who joined up as a teenager, got deployed to Iraq once, and came out deeply regretful of what they did, who subsequently did everything possible to fight the empire on behalf of their victims, who didn't brag constantly about what they did and weaponize being a combat veteran or a veteran in general as if it makes them a special class of person. That would be one thing. Look at these guys, for example.
My name's Nate. I served in the U.S. Navy from 1999 to 2003 and participated in the invasions of Iraq and Afghanistan. I was wrong to sign myself up for that. I apologize to the Iraqi and Afghani people for destroying your countries.
My name is Brock McIntosh. I was in the Army National Guard and served in Afghanistan from November 08 to August 09. 2 months ago, I visited the monument at Ground Zero for my first time with 2 Afghans. The tragic monument. I'm going to toss this medal today for the 33,000 civilians who died in Afghanistan that won't have a monument built for them.
I'm here to return my Global War on Terrorism Service Medal in solidarity with the people of Iraq and the people of Afghanistan. I am deeply sorry for the destruction that we have caused in those countries and around the globe.
They clearly deeply regret what they did, talk about who the actual victims of it were, and are very much discouraging others from joining up and doing the same. That's what Platner's defenders want us to believe he's like. But Platner isn't even remotely that. He went back for more 3 times, brags about it constantly, and doesn't conceive of his victims as anything more than bumps in the road. And for that matter, he certainly doesn't want to actually fight the empire. That part in particular is made quite clear by looking at his policy platform, which is freely available on his official campaign website, so you would assume that the American leftists defending him would have seen it, and that they are defending him in spite of it, which is kind of a problem because it's just blatantly imperialist and militaristic. Among Platner's positions, you will find a pledge to work tirelessly to rebuild the American military. That is a direct quote, not a paraphrase, it's right there. The way that he proposes to accomplish this is by reducing inefficiency in military procurement, by redirecting funding away from private arms companies and into a government-led effort to build more American warships and cargo shipping in order to compete with China for dominance of the seas, militarily and economically. He doesn't mention China specifically, but the language used here makes it obvious that this is what he means, because the phrase shipbuilding gap is a specific reference in this context to a panic among American imperialist commentators and politicians that they are being outpaced by China in shipbuilding, which they believe could result in China eventually overtaking the US in global military and economic influence. Platner wants to encourage more people to join the US military, not less. He proposes raising wages for American military personnel to entice more people into signing up in order to address the recruitment crisis. He wants the US military to expand, and he wants those who join to be well compensated for doing or facilitating things like destroying Iraq or Afghanistan, or bombing random Venezuelan fishermen. He also wants to ensure that, once they're done doing that, they're set for life via welfare provided by Veterans Affairs. Support our veterans, he demands, because for him, voluntarily signing up to go overseas and murder or help to murder poor people should entitle you to being showered with a lifetime of government benefits, not afforded to others. He clearly thinks it makes you a special class of citizen for life. Imagine a former Nazi soldier in post-war Germany running for political office on a platform of getting more benefits for Nazi veterans and on raising wages to entice more people to join the military to help rebuild it. Now imagine someone trying to frame that guy as actually an anti-imperialist, anti-military firebrand. Insane, right? Apparently not for some on the American left, because that's what they're doing with Platner. Some have been pointing to other positions in his platform that they suppose shows that he's actually anti-imperialist, like end the war in Gaza and no more pointless wars. But the reasoning behind these slogans tells the true tale. Platner's primary objection to the Gaza genocide is that American taxpayer money is being wasted on it. And this sort of concern, primarily for Americans, is the main underpinning of his limited anti-war stances. That's why the title of his ostensibly anti-war position is not something like "Stop massacring poor people" or something all-encompassing in general, like "No more wars," but rather it's specifically against what he considers to be pointless wars. For him, the Iraq War was not a crime on principle. It was not a travesty against humanity itself. Rather, the problem was that he just doesn't think there was much of a point to it, as Americans didn't benefit enough from it. Just listen to what he says about it in this section. "I will never ever vote to send Americans into a pointless war. Everything we went through in Iraq can be laid at the feet of those in Washington. There is no mention of the million dead Iraqis, of the utter destruction of their land and homes, of how the invasion caused the rise of ISIS, led to the Syrian civil war, and all up likely resulted in the deaths of 5 to 10 million people who would not have died otherwise, many of them at the hands of people like him. There is only mention of the soldiers who committed those crimes, and how pointless what they went through was. The perpetrators are framed as victims, and the victims are left out entirely. I can't help but compare this to the way that IDF soldiers are often framed in the Israeli and Western media as being victims who were traumatized by their time, literally running over Palestinians in bulldozers. The underlying implication of the sort of logic that Platner uses here, and which many other Americans who consider themselves on the left also tend to use, is that the possibility is open that he would support an imperialist war if he considered it to have a point. This reasoning is identical to that used by America First right-wingers like Tucker Carlson or the neo-Nazi Nick Fuentes. Those people don't really care that American wars massacre people and ruin the lives of the survivors, though they sometimes pretend to. What they care about is that they see them as a waste of American resources and manpower, as not sufficiently beneficial for American interests. And it's contradictory regardless to be like, no more pointless wars. But the military should expand recruitment and build more warships. So what exactly is the shipbuilding and recruitment for then? Because you would think that without the pointless wars, you'd be able to justify a downsizing, not an expansion. What's the expansion for, buddy? It's incoherent, and the reason for that is simply because he's not actually against American militarism. He's very much for it. Because anyone who is against it would be talking about downsizing the US military, certainly not expanding it. So taken together, these policy positions make it very clear that Platner is an imperialist who wants the US's resources redirected away from what he considers to be pointless and inefficient ventures into what he considers to be a more logical imperial strategy, a concerted government shipbuilding program and a mass recruitment drive to facilitate a refocusing of the military's primary goal towards competition and confrontation with China. Of course, it's naive to think that a Democratic Party primary candidate could ever be much more than this. The entire point of someone like Platner here, running what is being presented aesthetically as an anti-establishment campaign on the Democratic Party ticket, is to mislead people who are naive or inexperienced or who just don't know the dog whistles well enough to spot the problems in his policy platforms, into thinking that he is going to be their representative voice within the party, who's working against US imperialism and fighting the oligarchy and the establishment on their behalf already. So there's no reason for them to do anything outside of the party. But that's besides the actual point here, which is about what we can glean from the support for Platner among a big part of the American left, and especially among some of the most prominent, nominally left or progressive American political commentators. Before going over and responding to some examples of this, let's take a look at some clips from a discussion that Graham Platner had on a podcast regarding his Nazi chest tattoo, which is what spurred this entire thing in the first place.
In 2007, I was a machine gun section leader with Kilo Company, 3rd Battalion, 8th Marines. We were on the 2-2 Mu, and it was my third deployment. My previous two had been to Fallujah and then Ramadi, 2006. And we went ashore in Split, Croatia, myself and a few of the other machine gun squad leaders, and we got very inebriated. And we did what Marines on liberty do, and we decided to go get a tattoo. And we went to a tattoo parlor in Split, Croatia, and we chose a terrifying looking skull and crossbones off the wall because we were Marines, and, skulls and crossbones are a pretty standard military thing. And we got those tattoos. And then we all moved on with our lives.
Now, having a Nazi tattoo for 20 years and pretending that you and your buddies had no idea that it was a Nazi symbol is a joke. And that many are dumb enough to buy this, or cynical enough to excuse him for it, is quite disturbing already. Platner's leaked Reddit posts make abundantly clear that he knew what a Totenkopf was, as he had participated in Reddit threads talking about the Totenkopf, which he contributed to, noting that it was different to other skulls that were common among US military members, such as the Punisher skull. He also made other posts in which he defended American soldiers who use the literal SS lightning bolt logo, hilariously arguing that it's not racist because he totally has black friends with SS logo tattoos. Okay, dude. And 3 separate friends and acquaintances have claimed that Graham Platner told them directly that his tattoo was a Nazi symbol more than 10 years ago. One of them even said that he had described the tattoo to them as his Totenkopf, while Platner's former campaign director said that she had been aware of the tattoo since August and that Platner himself had acknowledged that it could be problematic. So it's clear that Platner was quite well versed on Nazi symbols, and there's absolutely no way he didn't know fully well what the Nazi symbol on his chest meant. Only after it finally got him some public scrutiny did he decide to get it covered up, with a Norse pagan wolf symbol, which is coincidentally just the sort of symbol that Nazis use when they're trying to be more subtle. The idea that this is like a naive 41-year-old man who's basically a child who didn't do all of this very intentionally is so absurd that it's just embarrassing that so many are willing to lie for him in ways they never would for someone they disagreed with. But there's a much worse part of this that's being overshadowed by the whole tattoo thing. You know, the bit where this guy talks about how he was a machine gunner in the US military, bragging about it and even appealing to it as a source of credibility. How is having a Nazi tattoo worse and of more concern than that? Actually killing people who you consider less than you for the American empire is fine, but where some chose to finally speak out was about a tattoo? And for that matter, the fact that so many US soldiers clearly identify with these sorts of tattoos should give you some food for thought as to what they're doing to their victims and how even they themselves perceive of it. The guy himself clearly saw a connection between what he was doing in Iraq and Afghanistan and what the Nazi SS did, which is why he got the damn tattoo. And that's the crux of the issue here. It shouldn't be considered normal among Americans to just go and murder people for the world's premier empire, and people who consider themselves left or anti-imperialist should be fighting such perceptions, rather than reinforcing them. What Platner did should be framed as reprehensible, and we should do what we can to discourage others from doing the same, because the fewer people who join the US military, the better. It's our job to push, and keep pushing to spread this notion. The millions of people murdered by the US military, and the millions more who will be murdered by it in the future, deserve at least this basic courtesy from you. But some would disagree. Emma Vigeland, co-host of one of the most popular progressive internet political news shows in the US, The Majority Report, had this to say about Graham Platner. How many people get tattoos they thought looked cool but didn't understand the meaning of? How many vets took mercenary work for a period because the US doesn't support them? How many young men have shitposted online? Do we want an authentic working class party or not? She then followed this up with, he addressed his Blackwater stint in our interview. It's difficult for veterans to integrate back into society and find jobs that fit them. He needed the money. It was for a short period. I find this whole discourse about his background to be pretty elitist, to be honest. So I've already addressed the Nazi tattoo part. She's just buying pretty clear lies here because she likes the guy. Even in spite of the whole Nazi tattoo aspect of it though, the fact that they're getting tattoos of skulls should in of itself be a red flag for you and clue you in to what this guy did and how he perceives of it. They're murderers. They know it and they revel in it. That's why they get symbols of death permanently tattooed onto their body, to celebrate and remember it. Platner himself just outright says this too. Here's his own post hoc explanation for the tattoo.
Hey everyone, Graham Platner here. I want to talk to you about something. In 2007, when I was a young infantry sergeant in the Marine Corps, myself and some machine gunners I served in Fallujah and Ramadi with were on our third deployment. We were on a naval vessel and we pulled in for a Liberty port in Split, Croatia. We went ashore to do the thing that young Marines do, which tends to be carousing and sometimes getting tattoos. We wanted to get something that represented our jobs, our service, fighting in Fallujah and Ramadi as machine gunners. We went ashore, we found a tattoo parlor after a fair amount of heavy carousing, and we found a tattoo on the wall, a piece of flash that looked like a terrifying skull and crossbones. We thought it looked cool, and so we got it.
So even if we were to naively believe that it wasn't meant as a Nazi tattoo, the guy just outright said that he wanted a symbol to represent what he did as he participated in American crimes against humanity in Iraq, particularly in Fallujah, where the US used chemical weapons against thousands of Iraqi civilians. Iraqi sources estimate that a minimum of around 4,000 civilians were killed by the US there. Platner, far from being regretful of the part that he played in this, got a skull and crossbones tattoo to represent it. That is significantly worse than if we were just talking about some random dumbass neo-Nazi who hasn't killed anyone yet with a Totenkopf tattoo that he fully well knew the meaning of. Among Platner's deleted Reddit posts, there is further confirmation of how he perceived of his victims in a post where he talks about the prospect of an American invasion of Syria, which reveals without any doubt that he saw the people he killed as inferior beings. We are going to kill thousands. By the end of it, it may be millions. Our way of life is better, and if that is what it takes to prevail, let's get this show on the road. So even if, ridiculous as the idea is, he didn't know that it was a Nazi tattoo, that really doesn't matter that much, because his rationale for getting himself tattooed with a skull is the exact same rationale for why the SS used a skull insignia. And that's the most important thing here. Ridiculous and offensive as the Nazi tattoo is, the whole being an unrepentant, enthusiastic contract killer for the US military, who relished in massacring people who he considered less than human, who brags about it constantly even today thing, is so much worse. Immeasurably worse. And quite frankly, it's worrying that it took the revelation of this tattoo to get people talking about Platner's horrible background in the first place, because he's been openly bragging about it for his entire campaign thus far. So let's move on to that. Vigeland makes excuses for his US military murdering and his stint at Blackwater. Not just that, but she talks about it with this condescending tone, like she legitimately couldn't even imagine someone thinking that he bears any personal responsibility at all for choosing to go overseas and massacre people for the US Empire 4 times, including once with Blackwater. She acts kind of like the people saying otherwise are just self-evidently being ridiculous. Her justification for this is that Platner apparently had difficulty finding a job, and this justifies him joining the military and then Blackwater for 4 tours. You know, he needed the money, so that makes it fine. Let's strip this argument down to its core premises. If you're unemployed and you need money, it's okay to take a job killing people for money. If you want free college, free healthcare, and a decent wage, it's totally fine to sign up for the clearly marked mass murder machine and go and murder some of the poorest people in the world yourself to get it. That's really the only interpretation of this argument when you look at it through a framework that actually treats all human beings as equal and does not consider Americans to be superior beings who get a pass to murder or facilitate murder for pay as long as it helps them to get ahead in life. If you wouldn't make this argument for a common contract killer who has all of the same sorts of motivations for doing that job, which is, killing people, who's just as motivated by his own material interest, who also needs money, who also needs a job, who also wants to get ahead in life, or any other murderer who committed their crimes because they wanted some sort of material advantage from doing so, like robbing their victim, or cashing out on a life insurance policy, or whatever other thing, then why would you make it for a contract killer for the US Empire? Unless you see what they're doing as somehow legitimized by the fact they're being done in the name of the US state. And you don't see the victims of US imperialism as equal humans. That's what the argument really comes down to. Americans are so superior, and the victims of their imperialism just so unimportant, that if you're an American, it's just justifiable for you to kill those people to get ahead in life. Sorry that I murdered or helped to facilitate the murder of your family, but I wanted free college. Surely you understand, right? That's way more important than their lives. I made this meme that you're seeing right now 5 years ago when I first noticed how common this sentiment was among the American left, and it's sadly only been proven more and more right since. This really is what many Americans actually believe. Needing a job doesn't justify signing up to kill people for the American empire. Having a lack of skills and being too proud to apply for a job at McDonald's or Walmart or waiting tables or whatever else doesn't justify murder for pay. Killing brown people for imperialism is not a normal, everyday job option that you weigh alongside every other option when you're unemployed and looking for work, or even desperate for work. Yet Vigeland and countless other Americans who would consider themselves to be leftists or progressives clearly seem to think otherwise. Actually, she's practically indignant and offended at the idea that anyone could find Platner's actions objectionable even in the slightest. For her, it's actually elitist to think that mass murdering Afghans shouldn't be treated as a normal entry-level job option like flipping burgers or running up a checkout. She even argues that this idea that Platner had previously been in the military and received a lack of support somehow justifies him subsequently joining Blackwater. So the sentiment there is that joining the US military should entitle you to be set up for life by the government, and if you're not, like if they don't take care of you afterwards in every way possible as if they were your mother, that justifies you doing literally anything, even joining fucking Blackwater. Vigeland even goes as far as saying that Platner is a working class veteran, and that the rest of his history demonstrates consistent left-wing and humanistic principles. I'd really like to know how literally spending 20 years of his life killing people for money demonstrates consistent left-wing and humanistic principles. This guy has been killing people for money pretty much since the second that he was legally responsible for his own actions. But aside from that, Vigeland is just lying about this anyway. Graham Platner is not working class. He comes from a rich family that tried to set him up for life the second that he turned 18. One of Graham Platner's old deleted Reddit posts is an extensive narrative about what led him to join the US military the first time. In it, he explains that he didn't have to work or anything after becoming an adult. Rather, his well-off parents tried to take care of him in pretty much every way possible. They paid for him to go to a good college, and when he decided that he didn't want to do that, they funded a backpacking trip for him around the world so that he could find a sense of adventure. Once he returned to the United States after this prolonged, all expenses paid by his parents' backpacking trip, he decided to join the US Marine Corps because he, I quote, had a deep-seated drive to experience war to its fullest. He says, "I had been waiting for my war since I was about 8, and I sure as hell wasn't going to miss it because of school. So in February 2004, I walked into a Marine Corps recruiting office. I told the recruiter I wanted 2 things, the infantry and to be in Iraq within the year. I love this job more than I ever thought I would, and my time in the Marine Corps was exactly what I had hoped it would be." So now that you have Platner's very own reasoning, straight from his own mouth, regarding why he joined the US military for the first time, I'd like to just read you this tweet from him regarding one of his Democratic Party primary opponents, Susan Collins. "Susan Collins sent me and my friends to die in Iraq 20 years ago. She learned nothing from it. Motherfucker, she didn't send you there. The US military is voluntary. You chose to go there because you said, I quote, I'd been waiting for my war since I was 8 years old, and this was apparently your war. You specifically demanded that the recruiter get you to Iraq as soon as possible so that you could kill Iraqis. What in the holy fuck are you talking about? I feel like a fucking crazy person or something because I'm the only one who's even noticed this stuff, and everyone else is just uncritically trying to paint this guy as something that he's not, including the man himself. She sent you to die? Motherfucker, you sent yourself there, and you weren't sent there to die, you were sent there to murder others, which you duly did, and you've said dozens of times that you loved it. Oh my god, I honestly don't know what to say." Additionally, after Platner left the US Marines after 2 so-called tours of Iraq, we know for a fact that Platner went to college for free and chose to drop out to re-enlist. He had a golden ticket to a career as a normal everyday civilian, but decided that he just loved killing people too much to stay away. Platner has always been either funded by his parents, killing people, or owning a business, and he's never been anything resembling working class. And when Platner was asked directly why he joined the US military, he didn't say anything about poverty or about being desperate for a job. Instead, he wrote, "Look, I was against the war in Iraq and did everything I could to stop it before it started. That's why I protested George W. Bush. I'd wanted to be a soldier since I was 2 years old. I personally had that urge. At 19, I was also a young man drawn to adventure. And serving overseas was the ultimate adventure." And this one isn't even like his old Reddit post where he's just being frank and honest. This is written on his official campaign account during a question and answer session on Reddit. So even when his campaigners had the opportunity to workshop his answers, they're still like this. So Platner claims that he knew the Iraq war was bad to the extent that he even protested against it himself. Yet he decided to join the military and go participate in it himself anyway, voluntarily, because he just wanted to have an adventure. He knew fully well what that adventure entailed and how horrible it was, but it just seemed fun to him, and he felt entitled to it, so he went and signed up for it. So Vigeland's excuses for him, he needed a job, he was poor, all of this sort of sob story stuff, are just bullshit, factually incorrect, lies. And that she and many others are so willing to just blatantly lie for this guy says quite a bit, I think. In general, defenders of murderers like Platner and their accessories love to invoke concepts like this of the poverty draft. This is something for which no evidence actually exists, and they never actually provide any evidence for it. They just present it as this sort of truism. Like the US military sort of forcibly drafts people who are poor against their will. They simply have no other choice. In fact, actual data shows that the average US military recruit comes from a family of average income at worst, which actually skews to be more above average than below it. The way that Vigeland and others feel the need to make these sorts of excuses for those who join the US military and brutalize other countries really shows, I think, that they understand that what these people do is indefensible in of itself. So they have to try and infantilize them or frame them as without agency to get them off the hook for it. So they tried to frame the volunteer killers for an extremely rich country's globe-spanning empire as if they were practically slaves. They have turned the Nuremberg defense of just following orders into a mantra. Basically, you have the right to just follow orders as long as you needed the money. This is a pretty common refrain in these sorts of arguments. They have a tendency to weaponize poverty, minority identities, and such to try and justify people joining the US military and murdering people for money. You'll be talking about massacred families and destroyed countries, and they'll be like, hey man, well, what do you expect? The US military is a great way to get ahead if you're an LGBT black Latino who grew up disadvantaged or some shit like that. And that's just such a transparently dishonest argument, because even in a case like this, where we very clearly are not talking about a poor, working class minority who grew up disadvantaged and apparently bears no responsibility for murder because of that, according to these people's logic, they will still try and infantilize the American soldiers, trying to remove all possible agency from them, to absolve them of murdering, destroying the countries of, the homes of, the lives of, the families of people infinitely poorer than any minority in the USA is ever gonna be. The people making these arguments know that what these people are doing is indefensible, and that is why they don't actually try and defend what they did, but rather try to instill the image in people's heads that they essentially had zero agency in any of it, even in patently ridiculous cases like that of Platner's. But that's really besides the point. Because even if you don't come from a privileged background like Platner did, even if you're destitute and desperate for a job, signing up to invade and occupy other people's country and massacre them or help to do that in another logistics role in the military or any other supposed non-combat role, that just is responsible, is still not something that it's acceptable for you to do. Would you defend a contract killer who was poor? Would you defend someone who killed and robbed their neighbor because they were poor? I certainly wouldn't, because whether someone's my neighbor or an Afghan on the other side of the world, I consider them to be equal to me. Obviously, right? Why do I even need to say stuff like this? You should not see it as acceptable to participate in an imperial mass murder machine, whether you're poor or not. I've been poor, and I never considered murdering people for money, let alone actually done so. Apply for normal jobs that don't involve murder or helping to murder, like what literally everyone else in the world who's not an American tends to do. And even if you can't find a job, then be unemployed and keep looking rather than signing up to go and fucking murder people. Having a limited spectrum of choice due to your material circumstances does not mean no choice. It does not turn you into a little baby with zero responsibility for your actions. We understand this in every other context. No one would be defending a poor unemployed person who murdered their friend for his money. But when it's murdering poor people on the other side of the world for the American state, suddenly the excuses all come flowing out. Material circumstances can help to explain why things happen, but they don't excuse them. And Americans very much mean these things as excuses. Again, the logic here is one that considers Americans superior. Whether the people who make these sort of arguments realize that or not, that's the sort of logic that they're using, the crux of their argument. The millions of dead brown people don't even factor into these sorts of arguments. They're literally just discarded entirely. All that seems to matter to those who make them is that the killers get something out of it for themselves. And that justifies what they do. This is similar to the logic that led people to join the Nazi Party. People who said they weren't ideological Nazis, but hey, doing so helps you get ahead, it helps you get job opportunities, and then, whoops, what happens next? You're helping do the Holocaust. It's also the exact same genocidal logic that many Zionists, especially liberal Zionists, have today. Sure, it's unfortunate that my country murders these people, these Palestinians, but ultimately participating in that can be justified because I prioritize my in-group. And this extends not only to this bewilderment that anyone could possibly find Platner's military service repulsive, but also to their willingness to support him in spite of his clearly articulated imperialist policy positions. And, the whole Nazi tattoo thing. Platner says he wants more benefits for Americans, more healthcare, better welfare, stuff like that. And ultimately, it seems like for many Americans, benefits for their in-group simply trump everything else. It's very easy for them to discard the fact that their government has a very negative effect on many more people outside of the US, and that policies like those that Platner espouses will only make that worse when Americans might get something out of it. In the same exact way that Israelis find it so easy to overlook what the state of Israel does to Palestinians because of what it gives to them and theirs. It's actually quite contradictory that many of those defending Platner here are also fairly anti-Israel or even anti-Zionist. They find it easy to denounce Israeli society and its genocide perpetrators, and see the things that Israeli Jews do to Palestinians for their own benefit as disgusting and unjustifiable. Yet the second they encounter a discussion regarding Americans doing similar to the victims of their own country, they clutch their pearls and seem to have just a never-ending list of excuses to throw out. It would seem that their opposition to Zionism is not one that is based very much in principle, as clearly they think quite a bit like Zionists do, just for Americans rather than for Israeli Jews. Another related argument that these types like to make is that American soldiers are propagandized, which apparently renders them just totally no longer individually responsible for their own choices and actions. The argument usually goes something like, you can't blame them for joining the US military. Americans are told to love their country and to love their military and to honor and support those who join it. They're heroes, you know? And specifically in regards to Iraq and Afghanistan, they often argue that post 9/11 propaganda was particularly intense, which thus justifies them joining. At their core, the thesis of these arguments is that killing is permissible, provided that you genuinely believe that what you're doing is right. So since Americans are convinced by propaganda or whatever other thing that the US military is actually good and does good things and they should join it and it's really good if they join, they can't be blamed for their actions anymore. This is pretty bafflingly stupid logic when you boil it down to what it actually is, as pretty much every murderer has motivations and excuses for why they did what they did, and some sort of rationale that justifies it to themselves. Most Nazis surely thought that what they were doing was right. Most IDF soldiers definitely think that what they're doing is right. ICE agents definitely think that kidnapping non-citizens is right. And in all those cases, there is a ton of propaganda reinforcing that notion for them. That all makes it okay, right? No, it doesn't, and none of you believe that. You just make an exception in the case of American soldiers. So you have to be operating on quite a high level of American supremacy and of dehumanization of the other to argue with such logic in the case of Americans doing the same. Probably the dumbest part of Vigeland's defense of Platner is the last line. Do we want an authentic working class party or not? If for Americans, authentic working class means massacring Iraqis and Afghans for fun and profit, then that's a problem that we desperately need to change as soon as possible, not something that we should accept, reinforce, and cater to, as she's clearly saying there. It takes a high level of self-delusion to frame murdering people for the empire as some sort of everyday, normal, working-class profession that it's morally wrong to judge anyone for, without catching yourself and thinking, hey, maybe I'm kind of making an insane argument here. Maybe the problem here isn't with people judging us, but with us. Maybe we're the ones who need to change, rather than others needing to be made to accept this. Are we the baddies? Were the people killed by Graham Platner and other American military members not working class? Poor, dispossessed, oppressed, brutalized people whose countries were devastated by the American military? Were they not working class? The people massacred by American troops who considered killing them to be little more than an everyday job, a fun little adventure or a game? Are they not working class? Is an authentic working class party one that unconditionally accepts, embraces, and supports, as its leaders, the unrepentant killers of working class people, and gets behind their policies of increasing pay and benefits for said killers of working class people? And it's elitist to take exception to this. It's elitist. Elitist. What could possibly be more elitist than feeling so entitled by virtue of your nationality, by virtue of the circumstances of your birth, that you think it's fine for you to sign up to go and murder poor people on the other side of the world for money? To do what Graham Platner did 4 times. You absolutely have to consider yourself a superior being to your victims, as we know for a fact that he did from his Reddit posts, and that is the very definition of elitism. I wonder what the Iraqis and Afghans, the actual victims of these wars, would say about the notion that thinking that it's actually bad to murder them is an elitist position. I wonder if they would think that that's actually pretty elitist. That she talks about this with such moral indignation, like she's the one who's on the side of the oppressed. She's the one who's fighting for what's right, is mind-boggling. Her idea as well that the Democratic Party is or could ever be an authentic party of the working class is just dumb in of itself. But the notion that an authentic working class party would need to be inclusive of unrepentant and proud mass murderers of working class people, some of the poorest and most downtrodden of the bunch in fact, to the extent that you even need to support them in their ambitions to become political leaders, references for the rest of us. It's just so immensely stupid that I would find it hard to believe that someone could make an argument like this except in jest, if I didn't already sadly have many years of experience dealing with people who say precisely this sort of thing constantly while being utterly convinced of their righteousness. Vigeland's Majority Report colleagues also joined in on this. Sam Seder, the main host of the show, is notably commonly considered to be an especially talented and knowledgeable progressive firebrand, a voice for the oppressed. So him and his crew are surely going to have a lot of really great and insightful arguments to make about this, right? Let's see.
We also have access to all of these posts that he made on Reddit for the past 10 years in this, sort of like a comment dump. And there's nothing that would substantiate any concept of being a Nazi to the extent that we can make an assessment of any of that stuff and characterize it within that. Is the vast majority of his anti-Nazi stuff.
Anti-fascist explicitly.
So the guy who has a long history of posts where he says that killing millions of people is fine because their way of life is inferior, defends Nazi symbols, who brags constantly about his extensive career murdering people, who was an actual bona fide guard at a concentration and torture camp, who fondly reminisces about guarding it, is actually anti-fascist and anti-Nazi. Now, personally, I think differently because I consider those sorts of things to be pretty fascist and pretty Nazi. I actually struggle to think of something that's more like Nazism than considering yourself so superior to others that you think you're entitled to go and invade their countries and kill them and put them in torture camps for the sake of your own material advancement. But then I also consider Middle Easterners to be equal humans, so I don't know. Maybe we're just coming at this from a different angle.
And even his Blackwater stint, we were talking a little bit off air. Is this not common, Brian, with people who don't have, are like trying to find work after being in the military?
Specifically the infantry. I mean, what you got to understand is that you don't have much of a job skill when you leave the infantry. And so if you're trying to make money and you're getting that's such an easy pipeline. Because, what else are you going to do?
What else are you going to do, guys, right? What else is there that you could possibly do? Not join the Blackwater mercenary company and go kill brown people for your 4th tour? Come on, that's insane. What a ridiculous, unreasonable expectation. He had literally no other option, okay? He just had to join Blackwater and go and invade another country for the 4th time. Don't you understand? This man was little more than an innocent, sweet, 34-year-old baby boy who was practically forced into joining. Hold on. Just gotta check my notes here. Blackwater. He wasn't responsible for his own actions. He's actually the real victim here. How dare you judge him for something as trivial as killing brown people for money? Are you saying that this man, who was once a baby, this former baby, should have just gotten a normal job instead of murdering them? What? That's insane. You're crazy. These people act like as long as an American has any reasoning for what they did to non-Americans, then they're basically a tiny little infant who can do no wrong. And everyone else is actually wrong for judging them for it. Even a 4-year-old knows that killing is wrong and understands what guns and tanks are for. Yet American adults who voluntarily join the military, like 4 times in a row even, are all poor little victims who simply had no idea what they were getting themselves into. They fought the tanks, the warplanes, the guns, they fought all of that stuff was for show. They didn't understand that it was to be actually used against the poorest people in the world. They don't have easy access to that information. They infantilize these people like how Israelis and Western Zionists in general infantilize IDF members and seem to be just itching to use the Nuremberg defense of just following orders to excuse them. The way that Americans try to disconnect the soldiers and other American military employees from this is very similar to how Germans spent decades upon decades, 50 years or so post-World War II, convincing themselves that Nazi crimes could all simply be blamed on the Nazi leadership and the SS, and that regular soldiers and supporters among the civilian population not only bore no blame, but were actually themselves victims of the Nazis. It's the exact same logic, the exact same arguments. A lot of American liberals and progressives and, in air quotes, leftists have been posting this quote recently by the Romani Holocaust survivor Karl Stojka. It was not Hitler or Himmler who abducted me, beat me, and shot my family. It was the shoemaker, the milkman, the neighbor, who received a uniform and then believed they were the master race. They've been posting this in regards to ICE and in regards to Trump supporters, yet none of them seem to realize the immense cognitive dissonance between them posting something like this to refer to those things, yet having a special exception solely for American military members. When it comes to the American military, they're just following orders. It's only those at the top who are to blame. But when it comes to the Nazis, to ICE, to the IDF, everyone is responsible. I hope this video perhaps helps some of you realize how ridiculous that is and how unprincipled, how logically, rationally, and intellectually bankrupt those who argue for this magical special exception in the case of imperialist mass murderers who commit their crimes in the name of their country is. It's infuriating, dehumanizing, and rankly supremacist. And it's honestly time that Americans wake up, stop passively absorbing this tripe, this sort of rhetoric from these sorts of commentators while they're half paying attention, and actually digest the crux of what they're saying and see it for what it is. It's so obvious how horrible this is when you stop to think about the rationale behind it, without this American supremacist framework that they're using. I wonder what those who make these sorts of arguments would think if we applied the same logic to ICE. If you need a job, why not just join ICE, right? They're recruiting and they're paying pretty damn well, up to $90,000 a year. You even get a $50,000 signing bonus and student loan forgiveness, among a ton of other benefits. They're even willing to recruit older people who would normally have trouble getting work because of age discrimination. Damn, that's a lot of money. I bet a lot of people could really use that money. It would really get them ahead in life. That's practically a poverty draft. If you're working class, this is a great opportunity. Sure, you might ruin people's lives and break up families and stuff. You might even kill people. But hey, you need a job, you need money, and as these people's arguments go, that basically makes you a tiny little infant, entitled to do literally anything with no responsibility for it whatsoever. Actually, anyone who criticizes you for doing it, they're in the wrong. Oh wait, no, it's not like that, because the victims of ICE are proximate to them. They're basically Americans in everything but documentation, rather than foreigners on the other side of the world who are much easier to dehumanize. So that makes it different, even though all the same arguments about needing the money and propaganda telling you that it's okay apply to this just as well. All cops are bastards because they police us, but our troops are poor little victims because they police others for us. Now, you would think that a progressive show like this that was looking to highlight relevant opinions on this would look for some input from people who have maybe been affected by American imperialism, the other side, the victims. Maybe, say, an Iraqi whose family was killed in one of the infamous American house raids that characterized the occupation. You know, in a similar situation regarding Israel and Palestine, you wouldn't seek out an IDF soldier who'd been to Gaza and have him come on and attempt to justify and excuse his crimes, would you? I'd sure hope not. But apparently you're actually wrong if you'd think that, because the majority report actually specifically clipped and uploaded a video of Sam Seder agreeing with a caller who spent 12 years in the American military.
My name's Eric from the Bay. I'm just calling because I wanted to talk about this Platner issue. Just the background on me, I'm a 12-year Army veteran.
Who called in to defend Platner, himself, and others like them, with all the same arguments that we've already gone over. Not only did this guy, a perpetrator of the very acts in question here, excuse Platner's Nazi tattoo by arguing that, actually, the people who know what that tattoo means, they're the real Nazis.
You know, Platner joined at 18 in 2003, sometime right after high school. Got the tattoo, according to him, in 2007. He's in his early 20s. And the idea that, you know, these guys in their early 20s, even now, much less 20 years ago, would have been so brushed up on their Nazi symbolism that if I were to take them into a tattoo parlor, here or abroad, and they walked in and looked at the flash wall and said, "Is that a Totenkopf?" I would have thought you were a Nazi if you did that. If you knew what that was, because that's weird as shit. Why would you know that? Okay, Adolf, calm down.
But he also argued that Platner joining Blackwater was fine because, get this, the alternative might have been that he would have had to work as a McDonald's manager after he came back from his free tours in Iraq and Afghanistan.
I wanted to also talk about people bring up the fact that he worked for Blackwater afterwards, or, you know, the fact that he was a government contractor. And I just want to say to people, like, the military does not, despite what they say, automatically set you up for success. And I would argue it can't, because that's just not its function, right? But it's not a guaranteed opportunity when you get out of the military that you're just going to be set up. And especially so for these guys in combat arms, because Brian may remember this. There's a program in the Army where you'd go in and put your skills in, and it's supposed to pop out a list based on your skills you earned in the military of all the jobs you could possibly do when you get out. And so I watched a guy who was a combat arms guy put it in the thing, and the list popped out, manager at McDonald's. And there's nothing wrong, I want to state, with being a manager at McDonald's at all, period. End of story. But if you're given the choice, like I'm going to go make $15 or $20 an hour being a manager at McDonald's, or I'm going to take a $130,000 cush office job with benefits at Northrop Grumman, what choice are you making, right? And maybe you wouldn't make that choice. Maybe you'd make that choice on principle, but you're making that choice out of privilege.
So, in response to a debate regarding whether it's permissible or not for Americans to mass murder people if they need some money, Sam Seder chose to highlight an unrepentant American military member of 12 years, who argued that it's actually privileged to judge people who voluntarily signed up to mass murder for the US empire, who then voluntarily chose to continue taking jobs that contribute to that imperialism and continue to harm people, like working for Blackwater or at an arms manufacturing company whose weapons are used in genocides worldwide, including the Gaza genocide, because otherwise they might have to be a manager at McDonald's. In the USA, the perpetrators of crimes against humanity for the American empire are highlighted by supposedly progressive leftist shows as they argue that actually not murdering or helping to murder people for the American empire is a privilege. It really just goes to show that they don't even see their victims as anything more than insects. Because if they did, I think they'd realize pretty quickly the ridiculousness of this argument. Because overall, if you consider the entire world and every person on it to be equal, then few things are more privileged than taking jobs that are entirely designed around harming some of the poorest people on Earth to get ahead, or because you think the alternatives are below you. That's an absurd privilege. One where you treat the poorest people on the planet as little more than resources for you to use. Their lives as something that you have the right to expend or to help expend for your own personal advancement. You can't seriously expect them to get a normal job like everyone else, can you? One where they're not helping to kill people? You judging them for that? That's what's privileged. Not the fact they treat literal human lives like sacrifices on the altar to getting themselves a better paycheck. The victims literally never factor into it for these people. Not for the unrepentant murderers themselves, nor for their supporters like Sam Seder in the Majority Report. They're only interested in hearing from the perpetrators. In fact, for them, it seems like the perpetrators are actually some sort of authority on this matter. Why else would they choose to highlight a clip from a US military veteran breaking it down and justifying what he himself did? What's next? Are you going to invite on a panel of rapists to opine about a sexual assault case? You really might as well at this point, because you've already done something on that level. Alongside these Majority Report progressives, other prominent, supposedly left-wing American commentators have recently been displaying some of these same tendencies. Krystal Ball, one of the hosts of Breaking Points, a show that fairly often denounces imperialism by name, stated in regards to Platner that she'll take a candidate with a regrettable tattoo over one who has steadfastly supported a genocide. And yeah, me too. But it's not just a regretful tattoo, is it? It's a Nazi symbol that is directly and irrevocably linked to his participation in American military atrocities. A symbol of how the man himself perceives of what he did. He brought death and destruction to people who he considered to deserve it. It's also clear that Platner is not some staunch, principled anti-genocide advocate. I mean, he was an enthusiastic, proud, and unrepentant participant in some of the worst crimes against humanity thus far of the 21st century, which he still brags about today. I'd actually say that what Platner is guilty of is actually quite a bit worse than just supporting genocide, because he participated in it. And that he's willing to say the word genocide regarding Gaza now does not outweigh that. That you perceive of these things as super different is a serious problem, and such sentiment is why I'm making this video in the first place. This is particularly important because the US military and the genocide in Gaza are irrevocably linked. Without the US military and its willing volunteers, there could be no Israel. So it's just plainly contradictory to be against the genocide in Gaza, to see the soldiers who carry it out as criminals, but also not to see someone like Platner in the same way. And in fact, to instill in your audience the idea that joining the American military isn't actually that big of a deal. Imperialism on the scale of that of the US cannot exist without a massive degree of conscious and very deliberate participation in it among much of the population. And those directly in the military are certainly some of the worst offenders. Ryan Grim, Krystal Ball's colleague, replied to her. He added, "This is a crucial moment for the Democratic Party. If they decide that normal people with skeletons in their closet or inked on their chests are not welcome, they are finished. Normal people. So you consider enthusiastic, proud, and unrepentant imperialist killers of 4 tours to be just normal people with skeletons in their closets, who we have to accept and get behind. Like, the demand is not just that this guy be allowed to live his life in peace and be anonymous, it's that he be supported in his quest to be elected to a leadership position, be given influence and power, and be turned into something of a leader of the left-wing movement. We should make him our representative, and it's basically ludicrous to think otherwise. The skeletons in this man's closet are very real, and they are not just an unfortunate tattoo. They are the actual skeletons of Afghans and Iraqis who he and his buddies killed. I don't think we all have skeletons in our closet is really meant to be taken quite as literally as this, but in this case it can be. People like this are talking about Platner and his past with the same degree of weight and seriousness as I think would be warranted if you were talking about, like, someone's embarrassing live journal from when they were a teenager resurfacing. So anyway, apparently mass murderers for imperialism need to be accepted because that's just normal. Appealing to the status quo is a really weak non-argument, especially coming from someone who usually frames themselves as going against the grain. If you appeal to normalcy back in the 1820s USA, you'd be defending slavery and slave owners. If you were appealing to normalcy in 1930s Germany, you'd be defending iron racial superiority. That normal people, according to Grim, think that being an unrepentant mass killer with a Nazi tattoo is just fine. It's not an indication that we should accept and nurture such ideas. It's an indication that we need to fight and put in effort to change that. I'm sure Grim would agree with me on this on many other topics, like how it's been considered normal in the USA pretty much forever to support Israel. But when it becomes time to support an American military killer who's advocating to give Americans better government benefits, exceptions are suddenly made. As soon as there is a potential conflict between what some Americans see as their own interests and anti-imperialist principles, suddenly some become staunch defenders of the status quo. Part of Platner's reaction to being exposed for being a closeted neo-Nazi with a literal Nazi tattoo was to post saying, "If they thought any of this would stop or deter us, they clearly don't understand our movement. They clearly don't understand Marines." So he's still invoking his supposed special status as an American Marine, as if he considers it something very praiseworthy, something special, something awesome. You know, one of the most notorious branches of the US military, with some of the most direct responsibility in its most heinous crimes. For a relevant example, how about the Haditha massacre of 2005, where honorable, tough, and special American Marines went house to house and systematically, summarily executed random Iraqi families, killing up to 25 people with gunshot wounds to the head from point-blank range. The youngest victims were 4 and 8 years old. Not one of the perpetrators of that massacre was ever convicted for the crime, nor even discharged from the Marines. Hoorah, US Marines! Anyone who considers non-Americans as equal humans should be disgusted by Platner being so endlessly proud of what he did to Iraqis and Afghans with the US Marines. It's like invoking your status as an IDF Special Forces soldier or an SS member to posture for street cred. Anyway, so Ryan Grim actually shared that post. Yep, staunch anti-imperialist right there. After this, Ryan Grim invited Graham Platner onto his show Breaking Points with Krystal Ball to do a nice little public relations puff piece for him. And I'm calling this a puff piece rather than an interview because it is a puff piece. Grim gives Platner very favorable framings of his questions, even suggesting him potential answers to them, and does not push back even when he clearly knows that Platner is lying, and even when what Platner is saying is patently ridiculous. I want to note, by the way, that Breaking Points makes no mention here of Platner's time as a prison guard at the notorious Abu Ghraib torture camp, in spite of this being well known and mentioned not only extensively in Platner's Reddit posts, but also openly in interviews that he's made with mainstream publications like The New Yorker. Key context to this interview is that immediately before it, Graham Platner basically hired a crisis public relations team, such as a Democratic Party consulting firm and a new campaign manager who worked on the Obama and Elizabeth Warren presidential campaigns. So the context of this interview is him trying to clean up his image with the help of deeply compromised Democratic Party operatives, specifically specialized in precisely that. For example, here is how Ryan Grim frames this Reddit post, where Graham Platner was explicitly talking about how much he would have liked to participate in numerous American colonial genocides.
One of the more disturbing Reddit posts that people have circulated talks about, it's a question, if you could fight in previous wars, what would you do? And you talk about kind of the joy almost of combat. And I think, so can you talk about like how you got into a mindset where you believed that, and whether you still share that mindset, whether you're in touch with it, and how that relates to your current posture towards American imperialism and wars in general, because we're talking about people getting killed.
He frames this as just a disturbing Reddit post about the joy of combat, which is clearly an extremely favorable framing of it that leaves a whole lot out. If he had said that he would have enjoyed fighting the Nazis or Confederates, no one would have said anything negative about it. That's not the problem with it. The problem with it is what he said he would have liked to do. But Grim leaves that out entirely, and he just talks about how he enjoyed combat, with no context of what that combat actually entailed, what its goal would have been. Genocide in this case. And Platner gives a suitably disturbing answer that shows that he really has no remorse for what he did, and actually just is still talking about how much he enjoyed it and how much his identity is tied up in it.
I viewed myself for a long time as a professional soldier. It was my identity. I was a very competent soldier. I saw a fairly significant amount of combat. I also, and I mean, this is a weird, I still work on, I'm going to work on this till I die, I think. I have a very complicated relationship with my time in combat, because I think it was all for nothing. I think the horror and the violence that I took part in was completely pointless. And yet I still have this element of me that when I was engaging in it, I found infantry combat very exhilarating. I found infantry combat, I found my proficiency in being an effective soldier in combat as something that I was very proud of it. And I, in some ways, enjoyed it. But I want to make it clear, I think I never enjoyed or relished in killing. Ever. But it was more like the professional challenge of other people are trying to kill you, and then you have to make decisions and be effective in your weapon systems, be effective in your leadership in order to survive and then win. And that was how I always viewed it. And the thing that I connect with now is that when I look back through history, I see a lot of people who, like me, engaged in wars of imperialism, wars of colonialism, who that experience in many ways, shapes and forms, turned them into dedicated opponents to it. One of the reasons I am in such opposition to this stuff now, I know how easy it is as a young person who wants to go do this kind of thing for whatever reason, how easy it is to be taken in by it. I mean, and that's why we shouldn't do it. Because there will always be young men and women who in their youth are going to be taken into being part of something bigger, finding meaning in struggle and suffering and all that stuff. And if that's going to happen, that should never be taken advantage of by a political apparatus, which is exactly what happened. It's what happened to me.
So there's a lot to unpack there. So let's begin very quickly with the parts that are clearly just him trying to whitewash his image after he saw pushback against him on social media. He obviously does not want to prevent people from joining the US military because he wants to give them more incentive to do so. So he's just lying about that at the end there. His policy positions are explicitly solve the recruiting crisis by giving them more money. We need a bigger military with more people incentivized to join it, not less. Second, notice the framing of his supposed anti-war stance, which I talked about earlier. Platner's problems with the American invasions of Afghanistan and Iraq isn't that they were wrong on principle, it's not that they caused immense suffering and deaths of millions of people. It wasn't that it destroyed their countries, it was rather that it was just pointless for Americans. The US failed to turn those countries into subservient puppet governments as they had sought out to. And that's the issue. He still enjoyed his participation in it, of course. He just would have liked it to have gone a bit better. Notice the framing there as well of him joining the military and going on 4 fucking tours over the course of 20 years, very deliberately, as a conscious choice when he had every other possible option in the world, as something that happened to him. It happened to him. He had no say in the matter. He's a victim here. The actual victims aren't mentioned at all. It's insane that there's zero pushback to this. It's a murderer framing him killing someone as something that happened to him. It's ridiculous. Now let's talk about the way that this guy talks about literally invading other people's countries, killing them, killing their families, and ruining the lives of tens of millions of the survivors. For him, fighting against these people in that context was exhilarating. It was a thrill. It was a professional challenge that he talks about in the same way that an interior designer might talk about a client who had some especially unique demands or something. No one would be apologizing for like a former SS member talking about their time fighting against Polish partisans like this. Yet in this case, Breaking Points offers zero pushback to this clear ridiculousness. He never relished in killing, he says, when his entire identity is centered around invading other people's countries and fucking killing them. And it's all by his own admission, right here. His claim is also complicated by the fact that, you know, he has posts saying that he joined to kill people and then did so and enjoyed it and had a great time. He comically tries to frame himself as now opposed to imperialism and colonialism, 2 words that he pretty much has never used before this very interview, which was specifically designed by Ryan Grim and the Breaking Points team to allow him to try and launder himself to a left-leaning audience who appreciates that sort of language, and then follows that up not by talking about the actual victims of imperialism and colonialism, but, as I've said throughout this video, framing the perpetrators of it like himself as the victims of it. The actual victims, the Afghans and Iraqis who he killed, aren't even mentioned. He actually kind of frames it like some people needed to participate in imperialism and colonialism because them turning against it was important, so it's a good thing that they did. Like the end result is a net good. And that's just insane. It treats poor people being killed by them as if they're stepping stones that need to be sacrificed so they can finally see the light. Like, how many people is it okay for you to kill so you can personally, as this one American individual, come to the same conclusions that others seem to have no issue getting to without fucking killing anyone? Give us a number. How many dead people is your supposed radicalization and your come to Jesus moment worth? And Ryan Grim's follow-up question isn't to scrutinize him on this. It isn't a follow-up question like, you talk about killing them and destroying their countries, like it was a fun professional project for you or something. That's really sadistic. And the fact that he went back 4 times after that really contradicts your claims to have been supposedly radicalized against the military. The fact that your policy platform is explicitly pro-military also quite clearly contradicts that. And you know what else contradicts that? This post from Reddit from November 2021, where Platner says outright that he would still be in the US Marines as a machine gunner, killing people for the US military, because that's what he loved to do. But eventually, you get promoted too much and they take you out of combat, and he specifically wants to be in combat killing people. Again, this is from November 2021, long after Platner, Grim, Vigeland, and others have been claiming he was supposedly radicalized, more than 3 years after his last stint occupying other people's countries with Blackwater in 2018. Grim, being a supposedly counter-hegemonic national security specialized journalist, surely should have investigated Platner's comment history and seen this. It would be journalistic malpractice for someone like him not to have done so. But he and Krystal Ball are not here to ask this man about the clear contradictions in the way that he's being framed and who he actually is and the crimes he's actually committed and how he feels about those crimes. They are here because they want to present him as something that he is not, as a repentant, genuinely apologetic former US military member who has now radicalized against the empire and against militarism, and they're doing this by just leaving out all of the important context that disproves this false image that they are building of him, by just letting him say whatever he wants with no pushback whatsoever, and in fact moving on to a complete softball question, which is basically a layup for the guy, basically saying to him, well, you know, you're basically exactly the same person as Smedley Butler, aren't you? Wow, you're so cool, dude.
One of the generals who participated in a lot of those small wars that you mentioned was Smedley Butler.
One of my personal heroes, unsurprisingly.
No questions asked about how insane what the guy was saying is, about how he describes his entire identity as being based around invading other people's countries and killing them and supposedly being really good at it, to the point he signed up to do it 4 more fucking times, about how he's clearly lying about supposedly having turned against the empire and colonialism and all this sort of stuff. No, just immediately moving on to a straight up layup. You can see this clearly as well with Ryan Grim explicitly giving Platner the opportunity to whitewash his work for Blackwater here.
We got a whole bunch on, your service and then also your time with the Blackwater offshoot, what Constellus, I think it was called. One of them, so from Halal Flow says, like, how does someone with your worldview end up working for Blackwater?
He gives Platner another layup there by framing his work with Blackwater as instead being for a Blackwater offshoot, Constellus. This is an incredibly dishonest framing, and Grim definitely knows this. I mean, he knows what Blackwater is and he knows what Constellus is. Constellus was not a Blackwater offshoot. It was the result of a merger between Blackwater and many of the other significant American mercenary companies that arose as a result of the invasions of Iraq and Afghanistan. As American operations in Iraq and Afghanistan were downscaled, there was no longer a need to have so many different separate mercenary companies, so these mercenary companies, Blackwater included, merged together to form one big company called Constellus. So Constellus is Blackwater, and it's also a bunch of other notorious, horrible, murderous American mercenary companies, all in one big, horrible company. Grim knows this, and he frames it as merely a Blackwater offshoot, a favorable framing that allows Platner to build off it to whitewash his own past, like so.
Why should that not be disqualifying?
So, I never worked for Blackwater. This is I've been, like, I see this everywhere, and I'm always like, oh, for God's sake. The company that we all know is Blackwater, the one that Jeremy Scahill wrote about back in the late 2000s. That company, Eric Prince's little kind of warlord fantasy, that company essentially went away after 2012, and it was sold. I forget who bought it. There were several iterations afterwards. Similar, like, same facility down in North Carolina.
So his rebuttal to that is, I didn't work for Blackwater, I just worked for the merger between Blackwater and all these other horrible American mercenary companies. Yeah, dude, that's so different. Again, Grim and Krystal Ball definitely 100% know this is total bullshit. You would know that it's bullshit just by looking at the Constellus Wikipedia page. Yet they don't push back on this at all because they're trying to launder this guy's image. It's especially bad because Platner actually has a long history of defending Blackwater in his Reddit comments. In May 2021, he posted saying that the whole Blackwater hit squads narrative is complete bullshit. Blackwater, according to him, just provided security. He then whitewashes the Blackwater-perpetrated Nisour Square massacre, where Blackwater contractors opened fire on random Iraqi civilian vehicles at a roundabout in Baghdad, killing 17 and injuring 20. According to him, that massacre was merely a massive fuck-up. Hello, editing bad empanada here. I was just about to render this video, and then look what I found. Here is a picture of Graham Platner from August 2023. What's that on his fridge? Oh, it's a Blackwater sticker. That kind of complicates his narrative here that he didn't consider himself an employee of Blackwater, doesn't it? He actually did consider himself one, and he had stickers of them on his fridge. In August 2023, I gotta say, Ryan Grim, Krystal Ball, all you other people, you have to learn that people can lie. You have to learn that someone can say something to you that's just straight up a lie. It's insane that they never ask any questions of this. Now, aside from that, who's this person to his left, the one who posted this Instagram post? That's Seth Fransman. Who's Seth Fransman? Graham Platner's close friend and stepbrother. Here's some pictures of them hanging out and having a great time. Fransman was even in Maine during the launch week of Platner's campaign. Here's a picture of Seth Fransman just a few months after he took that picture with Graham Platner in front of the Blackwater fridge, embedded in Gaza with the IDF. Here's a picture of Seth Fransman presenting his book, propagandizing the Gaza genocide as a glorious Israeli operation, to the president of Israel, Isaac Herzog. Here's a flyer for a talk that Seth Fransman gave to AIPAC. Here's an interview that Fransman published with Graham Platner in 2021 in the Jerusalem Post, a genocidal Israeli propaganda newspaper. There is a ton more here. This is just what one random person on Twitter happened to find, and I happened to see it. Like a random 20-follower Twitter account basically found this stuff just by looking through Graham Platner and his friends' social media. There's probably way more out there, but this guy is absurdly compromised. It is insane that this stuff is just sitting there on people's social media accounts openly, but the problem is that supposedly left-wing people aren't asking any questions about him, so no one's really finding this stuff. This is the sort of thing that people like Ryan Grim and his team should be finding, but instead they're more interested in glazing this guy. So yeah, Platner seemingly having links to like a straight-up Israeli propaganda agent, that's a whole lot. This video is not so much an investigation into that stuff, though I'm more trying to make a broader point about what this apologism for Platner says about the willingness of the American left to just forgive US military members so easily when they've done nothing to merit that forgiveness. And what that says about their broader attitudes to people in the global south who are their victims. So I'm going to leave it up to others to look more into this extremely compromising stuff regarding Platner's background and continue more along that line. But honestly, it shouldn't be required because just the military stuff is already bad enough on its own. You shouldn't need this like, oh, here's linked to Israeli intelligence stuff on top of that to realize that this guy is bad news. And I just want to note as well that Graham Platner's campaign seems to be watching my social media because as soon as I started posting this stuff there, the post immediately started getting deleted, like within 10 to 20 minutes. Clearly, Seth Frantzman had gotten notice that he should be deleting these posts. And I was the only significant person who was talking about them when they were getting deleted. So yeah, I'm pretty sure his campaign is watching me because I've been critiquing so much. And I wouldn't be surprised if they try to adapt their messaging to appeal to you guys. Like, I seriously would not be surprised if Graham Platner starts trying to frame himself more for a left-wing audience as like a more repentant veteran who talks way more about the victims of his crimes and stuff like that. So look out for that as well. Anyway, so this is Editing Bad Empanada out. Let's get back to the rest of the video now. Not only that, but guess what else is in his deleted Reddit posts? Posts from 2018, when he was working for Constellus in Afghanistan, show him defending Eric Prince and Blackwater from allegations that they were involved in helping the George W. Bush administration with targeted assassinations. Graham Platner ends his time talking about Blackwater in this interview by saying that his problem with working for them was not the whole thing where, man, it's fucked up that I'm a foreigner occupying someone else's country. Rather, it was that he didn't see enough progress from the last time he was occupying it. He thought the US was going to lose and they did not have any ideas to avoid that eventuality. And it's a waste of American taxpayer dollars. That's why he wanted out.
And there I am 7 years later at with access to all the brain trust. Nothing had changed. Same nonsense.
Wow.
And I was like, we are going to lose this war. And when it collapses, it's going to be a mess. Now, I don't want to say I was right, but you know, and I didn't want to be there when that happened. But two, I was like, there's no purpose to this. Nobody has any idea. Like, the embassy is constantly under construction because there's always some new security threat that we have to pay somebody. Some contractor comes in and has the whole thing was just a scam. It's just one huge scam paid for by tax dollar money.
This dude isn't against imperialism, as I said. It's not anti-imperialism. It's not even humanism. It's just we're doing this incompetently. This is a waste of American money and time. That is not anti-imperialism. It's clear that if these invasions and occupations had been managed better, run more efficiently, and more clearly aimed to benefit Americans at home, the dude would have been all for them. But again, Ryan Grim and Krystal Ball do not call him out on this contradiction. They do not call him out on the fact that his reasoning here is the exact same as Nick Fuentes. Once Platner is done answering this question about his involvement with Blackwater, Grim and Ball have no follow-up questions. They just accept everything that he said and move on to something else.
You said someone approached you about running. Who was it?
No one would ever accept this sort of softball puff piece that frames someone as something that they are actually the polar opposite of if it was someone they disagreed with. And if you are an American left-leaning or anti-imperialist person, you should ask serious questions about people like this and why they are so desperate to frame this guy as something that is not, to lie about what he stands for, who he is, and what he's done, and to absolve him so easily and so quickly of some of the most heinous crimes one could ever commit that he has never so much as apologized for or expressed an ounce of regret for. He enjoyed his time in the military, destroying other people's countries, and reflects on it in the same way that others might reflect on a cherished childhood memory. That is the reality here, and I think there should be some deep reflection among you guys as to where this sort of impulse to apologize for and whitewash these sorts of people comes from. Because I think it's a symptom of something very deep-seated that is going to seep into and hamper any genuine attempts that you guys make to fight against imperialism from within the US itself. Because you're not even going to get started when joining up to kill people for the US empire is seen as something as normal as this, to the point where someone who did so doesn't even need to seriously and honestly reflect on what they did and to whom, in order to get practically unconditional adoration and support, and to be so easily forgiven by people who are supposedly the allies of their victims. This video wouldn't be complete without talking about Hasan Piker, one of the largest self-identified left-wing political commentators on the internet. In a short posted to Hasan Piker's official channel, he talks about how he was skeptical of Platner because of his service in the American military, then talks about how he reassessed him as a result of seeing his old Reddit posts where he posted communist memes and said he hates cops. He even states that he had plans to bring Platner onto his stream for a public relations puff piece.
The thing that I want to say about Graham Platner is that his previous work for Blackwater obviously made me a little bit skeptical, not even a little bit, very skeptical of his background. But I'm going to be honest with you, some of the stuff that I saw from him at Peak Woke 2020, some of the shit that he was saying back then kind of made me feel like he might be a good dude. The highlights here are Maine Senate hopeful Graham Platner once called himself a communist, dismissed all police and said rural white Americans actually are racist and stupid, according to deleted social media posts reviewed by CNN's K-File. My fucking goat. Listen, 2018 Blackwater stint, numerous tours, very suspicious, but this, very good. I am not defending his career in the military. I am not defending him as a defense contractor, but this I do defend.
And guess who else said that not joining the US military to mass murder people is privileged? It wasn't just that veteran caller to the Majority Report, it was also Hasan Piker.
Some of you fucking dumbasses really need to just rein it in, dude. It's so ridiculous. It's so privileged in many ways where we're just like, listen, I didn't go through these experiences, so I'm obviously morally infallible as opposed to this fucking guy, you know? And before any number of you dipshits turn around and cynically try to tell me, what do you think a Rocky feels about this? You already know my position on this, okay? You're not from there. You're from America. You live in fucking Connecticut, okay? In your father's McMansion. Shut the fuck up.
You never went through the experiences this guy did of, voluntarily signing up to go overseas and massacre people. You goddamn privileged assholes! How could you possibly judge this man? Out of all the people featured here, Piker is probably the one who frames himself as the most anti-imperialist, yet he exhibits similar tendencies to the others, putting more weight on Reddit posts than he does on Afghan and Iraqi lives. I want to note here that in 2018, which is when Platner made a lot of these Reddit posts, he was in Afghanistan working for Blackwater. Apparently actions don't speak louder than words for some, and as long as you say the right things on social media, it really doesn't matter that you were in a notorious mercenary company occupying a foreign country on your 4th tour. Piker then went on to frame Platner as an example of someone with a questionable past who has redeemed themselves by seeing the light later in life, dishonestly framing those who are uncomfortable with his past as if they are just blanket against any and all possibility that an American military veteran could ever be forgiven for their crimes.
If you talk about him being a combat veteran and then actually being disillusioned and being anti-war, that's normal. You don't understand this, chatters, but there are thousands of them in this fucking community right now, because I'm not a fucking dickhead like you are, because I'm not a stupid fucking unrealistic, idealistic, LARPing ass dickhead like you are, because I understand that people are products of their environment. So they are going to have racist starting positions. They're going to engage in heinous acts, okay? Ultimately, what matters to me is who they are now. What is the lesson that we're teaching everybody? By and large, people look to this and go, okay, this person is demonstrating growth, and that's a good thing. And the most leftist community is like, fuck that! There is no growth! There is no no such thing. What does that look like to the outsiders, you think? Do you think that we are actually building a serious movement? Do you think that we are actually doing a good thing? No redemption!
This is obviously bullshit framing, as no one is talking about someone who simply made the mistake of joining up, went on one tour, realized how wrong it all was, and then quickly got out deeply regretful of what they did and wanting to atone for it. We're talking about a sadistic mass killer who voluntarily signed up for 4 tours, who brags about what he did to this very day, who weaponizes his crimes for social clout, who constantly talks about how much he enjoyed it, and who is vying for a political leadership position on a policy platform that is blatantly militaristic. But Piker finds it very easy to lie through his teeth about this, and I think it's important to ask why, which is what this whole video is about. There is a clear contradiction in the way that Piker, and others with similar or even worse opinions on this, have endless grace for American military criminals like Platner, and how quick they are to entirely disavow others for comparatively less severe transgressions. Recently, one of Hasan's friends, a recurring guest on his stream, was outed for sexually harassing fans in direct messages online. Piker and everyone else in his space pretty much immediately ostracized that person entirely. But it seems that for them, massacring Iraqis and Afghans is not quite on the same level of seriousness as sexually harassing people online, because far from ostracizing Graham Platner, they seem very willing to embrace him and very willing to misrepresent who he is and what he stands for and what he thinks about his past, to encourage us to embrace and support him in his bid to become a political leader in a position of real influence and power. Maybe it's because Hasan's friends sexually harassed Americans rather than Iraqis or Afghans. As part of his impassioned defense of American military mass murderers, Piker invoked the concept of restorative justice.
The left is like restorative justice, and then let's not shun people who try to restore. Yeah, no, a lot of people on the American left especially are not invested in restorative justice.
I see this argument used quite a bit by those who are against any sort of accountability for American soldiers, and it's a complete mischaracterization of what restorative justice actually is. It means acknowledging the harm that you've done and atoning for it by working with your victims to reach some sort of understanding and restitution, hence restorative, because you are restoring something to your victims. Obviously, Platner hasn't done anything even resembling that. But what these people mean to imply with this rhetoric is that restorative justice and accountability for harming people on the other side of the world, like Iraqis and Afghans, is achieved not even by engaging with those people at all, but rather instead by advocating for universal healthcare and better welfare benefits for Americans. You know, the people from the country that destroyed Iraq and Afghanistan. Piker and others dishonestly weaponize this mischaracterization to gaslight people into believing that Platner and others like him have already addressed the wrong that they did to a satisfactory degree. So it would seem that for some, the way that you are reformed or rehabilitated after you spend 20 years massacring or helping to massacre Iraqis and Afghans for the USA is to then attempt to run for political office in the USA on a platform of being a proud combat veteran who wants to give Americans free healthcare and even more incentives to join the military so that the USA can keep doing more of what they did to Iraqis and Afghans to others. That makes about as much sense as paying reparations for slavery to the slave owners rather than the slaves. It's nonsensical when scrutinized, and that's because it does not come from a rational position. And just to make a note here of something important as well, because I know some people are going to harp on this, the combat veteran distinction really isn't that important either. The US military has one singular purpose, which is imperialism. And those who pull the trigger for it are just as important to it as the truck drivers who deliver them their ammo, the mechanics who fix the tanks, the bureaucrats who help to keep everything running, or the medical staff who nurse the combatants back to health so they can go and kill more poor brown people. Piker justified his reflexive support of Platner by, as Ryan Grim did, appealing to the fact that it's just considered normal among Americans to do what Platner did. He positively screamed in rage about this upon seeing someone in his stream chat who was disappointed with his willingness to excuse Platner's crimes.
But killing Iraqis isn't... Dude! Wake up! Shut the fuck up! We are talking about the average fucking person, the average American. They do not think of this in the way that you do. Oh my God. This is what I was saying before. Oh. Terminally online chirpers that run around. Dude, go to a local coffee shop or go to, I don't know, a restaurant and try to hear what the average person's opinion is on someone who has done 4 tours in Iraq and Afghanistan, a Marine Corps guy. They do not think that he is a baby killer.
So he appeals to what's normal among Americans. We shouldn't advocate against these horrible, terrible things done by Graham Platner and others like him. We shouldn't shine a light on the perpetrators of such crimes. Because Americans think they're good and fine, and that's just all that matters, right? Imagine an Israeli condescendingly waving their finger at you. In our country, it's considered normal to join the military and kill Palestinians. And it's ridiculous that you have such mean words for our soldiers, our veterans. You'll never get anywhere acting like that. People will think you're crazy. Yeah, it's the same argument. Right now, many people are in a state where they would likely be much more receptive than usual to ideas like this, as they're seeing what Israel is doing in Gaza, and more of them than usual do not like it one bit, and they see the people carrying it out as psychopaths. Some of them are also seeing what ICE agents are doing in their communities, and they sure hate the ICE agents for it. This could easily be used to relate those same sentiments back to the American military, to talk about its crimes and its unrepentant criminals, like Graham Platner, who willingly and proudly carry them out. It's a golden moment for someone who has hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of well-meaning American fans to say, hey guys, what this guy did for our country is really not that much different to the sort of thing that brought you to my stream in the first place. It's similar to what you've been seeing in Gaza, and even worse than what ICE is doing here. But no, staying within the bounds of the status quo, keeping things comfy for the average American, not challenging them at all, not taking advantage of this great opportunity to move the needle, that's more important to him. Getting anyone elected on the Democratic Party ticket in the short term to ineffectually advocate for benefits for Americans seems to be worth a lot more to him and many others like him than putting in the effort in the long term to try and move the needle on imperialism. All of this is indicative of a huge problem with a large and influential part of the American left, even many of them who consider themselves to be against imperialism, anti-war, etc. The fact that this imperialism oppresses, murders, and dispossesses countless human beings is an afterthought at best, something that they have demonstrated they find very easy to discard if taking it into account might inconvenience their advocacy for benefits for Americans, which also results in its adherents finding it quite easy to forgive the individuals who participated in American imperialist crimes, to the extent that they're happy to embarrass themselves by making arguments like, murder is fine as long as you're an American who needs a job, and actually, it's elitist to say otherwise, and you're privileged if you think otherwise. Now, all of that is well and good, but the thing here is that Hasan Piker is not saying this stuff because he legitimately believes it's a good argument, because he legitimately believes it's correct, because he's just misled. He's saying it because he is deeply compromised by the Democratic Party. And this is just out in the open here, it's by his own admission. Hasan Piker recently said this.
Look, it's not a secret, guys. Like, yes, now that the election is over, we can be open about it, okay? Yes, of course, I am fairly well connected with not only Zoran, but also the campaign, okay?
So we know for a fact that Hasan Piker has been working with the Zoran Mamdani for Mayor campaign in New York City. Emphasis on the "and with the campaign" here, because Zoran Mamdani's campaign is run by a Democratic Party consultancy firm known as Fight Agency. Fight Agency either manage or outright control the campaigns of pretty much every single significant Democratic Party so-called progressive electoral candidate. They ran the John Fetterman campaign, for example, which before Mamdani was their most prominent success. And it just so happens that Graham Platner is literally their pet project. It's Fight Agency, the people who Hasan Piker has direct contact with, who he is directly collaborating with, that convinced Platner to run. He is running on their platform essentially as their guy. Everything about his policies, how he talks, what he says, his persona, his image, it was decided on by Fight Agency. Fight Agency have done this with a number of other people as well. In an article by the Washington Post called Here Comes the Rugged Guy, 3 candidates are profiled, all of whom are bearded, rugged, supposedly working class guys, all of whom are military veterans, and all of whom are managed by Fight Agency. So the reason why Hasan Piker is just throwing out all of these ridiculous logical arguments to defend Graham Platner is because he has direct connections with Platner's campaign itself. The incentive structure here is super clear. These guys run the campaigns of and thus control access to a ton of Democratic Party progressive politicians. And Hasan Piker certainly can't afford to get on their bad side. I mean, he's literally said outright that he works directly with them. It's not exactly subtle, so it very well could go beyond just being an incentive structure, and he could just outright, straight up, be defending Platner because he's on the team now. He's openly said that he was hiding his links to the Mamdani campaign during the election. He's clearly willing to do unscrupulous things like that, so he can't really be trusted not to be doing the same thing in other cases, can he? And this is something that you should seriously suspect, because in another interview, Hasan Piker has outright stated that he is now directly doing consulting for the Democratic Party, work that he has until now kept secret.
I have had closed-door private meetings with a lot of people that I never thought would desperately want to talk to someone like myself. People who have greater ambitions within the party structure, people who are representatives of the old guard, and obviously most of that conversation still centers around, like, how do we reach these kids? Right. You've seemingly been able to do this successfully. How can we do it as well?
Another thing that's absurdly suspicious is the fact that the redemption line regarding Platner that Piker kept harping on in the clips that we went over is a talking point that was being workshopped by Fight Agency itself to defend Graham Platner. Vanity Fair recently profiled Morris Katz, who is one of the main strategists for Fight Agency. The article talks about how Katz was simultaneously busy helping to run the Mamdani campaign, while also desperately trying to do damage control in the wake of the Graham Platner Nazi tattoo controversy. He looked at a monitor, reviewing and approving a new set of Mamdani ads. Then Katz talked through a statement he was writing for Platner's campaign, trying out a line about the importance of a party that's open to redemption. That sounds awfully familiar, right? Now, this is obviously not definitive proof that Hasan Piker got this talking point from Fight Agency, but it is pretty damn suspicious that we know for a fact that he is in direct contact with them, that he is very weirdly reluctant, even under pressure from his audience, to denounce Graham Platner, and he just happens to be using the exact same talking points that Fight Agency came up with for that Graham Platner damage control campaign. Hasan Piker is not an independent actor who is allowed to think independently and to speak independently. He is now part of a wider political machine that is putting limits on his speech, and that, ultimately, is why he is defending Graham Platner here. I would love it if instead of this was just a disagreement, if I could possibly get through to him with good argumentation, but sadly that simply isn't the case. This next part is a very late inclusion to this video, so it might contradict some things that I said previously, like about Hasan Piker being the person featured here who postures as being the most anti-imperialist, for example. But I nonetheless want to include this because it's just so absurdly ridiculous. Anyway, so Chapo Trap House, who are usually pretty much exactly the sort of people who would shit on and laugh at a proud American veteran who just talks about it endlessly and brags about murdering brown people and stuff like that, recently had an episode where they covered Graham Platner, and oh man, were they ever extremely suspiciously, uncharacteristically light on him. Like, just for reference, here's what one of the hosts has previously said about the people who join the American military and then claim to be left-wing. Platner definitely does not meet the incredibly generous criteria that he laid out there. And here's just a small selection of the choice words that he has had for people who volunteer for the IDF, which, as I've made clear throughout this video, is the same as volunteering for the US military. And now with Graham Platner showing up, it's time to put your principles into practice. And well, I'm not going to beat around the bush here. They recently had a podcast episode where they pretty much just got behind Platner 100%, making a lot of the same excuses as these other people were for him. Threw in some caveats here and there like, oh, I think it's weird that he was a mercenary, and then nonetheless went on a minute later to talk about how good his politics are, without so much as a cursory analysis of them, or the contradictions between them and who he actually is and what he's actually done, how he's clearly lying 99% of the time, or anything like that, and about how there was really nothing concerning among his Reddit posts or anything. Here's a couple of choice bits. Bits that we have already thoroughly debunked in this video, by the way.
I don't think he's a Nazi. Or I don't think he is any more or less of a Nazi than anyone else who volunteers for the U.S. Marines, which is to say a non-zero amount of Hitler particles. But like, look, if you were a Nazi, like his Reddit post would be something a lot worse than just saying black people don't tip.
Yeah. And like, I mean, the thing that was like a deal breaker for me was the fact that he was a mercenary.
Yeah, that he joined one of the most heinous private armies in the world. But the guy I kept thinking about when I think about Graham Platner and his like sort of like cool anti-war politics now, and like, you know, like, yeah, he's sure like he's not celebrating the flood operation or Hamas, but like I think most of his public statements on Israel Palestine have been correct and admirable as far as I can tell. Like, you know, within the confines of like the Democratic Party. But like, I gotta say, if I lived in Maine, I would still vote for him. Like, what do you want from me here? Because like most of his Reddit posts were like, yeah, I own guns. And if you come after trans people, you're fucking going to get destroyed by me. And it's just like, isn't this all the fucking heckin' gun communism shit that we're all supposed to love? Yeah, like, of course the guy who's writing it is a goofy. So are you. All of his public political pronouncements, all of his public statements and the campaign he's running seem to be, I'm totally cool with it.
Now, it really just doesn't make any sense for them to only be skeptical about him because of the Blackwater stuff and not the, like, him enthusiastically signing up to go back to Iraq and Afghanistan 3 or 4 fucking times thing. It doesn't make any sense that you consider the mercenary stuff to be worse than just directly doing it for the US government. But they threw that in there just to sort of give themselves like some plausible deniability here. Like, oh yeah, I'm acknowledging the Blackwater stuff, and now I'm going to go on to just talking about how awesome he is in basically every other respect. Hope my audience doesn't notice. They paint him as having cool anti-war politics and a supposedly correct position on Israel-Palestine, which are ideas that I refuted like an hour ago or more at this point. And they just straight up said that they are completely on board with basically his entire political platform and everything that he's ever said publicly. I want you to think about that the next time you watch these guys' podcast. If you are at all on the left, anti-imperialist, think about them saying that. Think about what that means about what their real politics are. And they really make the whole, all we really care about is benefits for ourselves thing clear with this statement.
Honestly, I don't care what anyone does. He could have a tattoo of every frame of the Band of Brothers episode Why We Fight tattooed on his back with the words, this did not happen, written over them. And I'd be like, he said he's sorry. I don't care if he was with my program enough.
Anything is forgivable, even killing Iraqis and Afghans, as long as you're on board with universal healthcare and slightly increased welfare benefits for Americans. Now, you might ask the question of, why the hell is this happening, right? These guys never would have said something like this 4 or 5 years ago. Probably, at least. I hope not. And the answer to that question really is quite simple. They have a ton of audience overlap with people like Hasan Piker and many others who have mostly been very pro-Graham Platner. When people you frequently collaborate with, who you have a lot of audience overlap with, are saying one thing, you can't really go hard against that because there's the potential there for creating conflict, losing subscribers, losing views, losing income. So why rock the boat? Now, Chapo Trap House recently did an interview with Zoran Mamdani. Zoran Mamdani, whose campaign, as I mentioned, is run by Fight Agency, for whom Graham Platner is something of a pet project. It's not really hard to put 2 and 2 together here. There are clear incentive structures at play, causing Chapo Trap House to be very uncharacteristically light on Graham Platner. So light that their comments are pretty much full of people who are like, hey, what the hell is this? This doesn't make any sense. What has happened to you guys? Fight Agency are the gatekeepers of access to pretty much every single supposedly progressive Democratic Party candidates, and they will probably only become even more significant in the future. So why rock the boat and potentially get on these guys' bad side by being honest about Graham Platner, honest about who he is, honest about what he said, honest about what he stands for, honest about what he's done, when doing so could potentially compromise you getting another big-time interview with their Democratic Party candidates in the future. The incentive structures at play here are very clear, and your favorite podcasters are clearly not at all immune to them. You have to be very highly principled to speak your mind all the time, and not to grit your teeth and say things that are more amenable to your own material interests every now and again. So watch this space. They aren't as clearly compromised as Hasan Piker obviously is yet, but they may very well be enticed to become on that level soon enough, because they are already very clearly regulating their rhetoric to avoid getting on the bad side of some serious Democratic Party influence gatekeepers. I often myself quite weirdly get accused of grifting because I criticize people like this who are also on the so-called left when they say or do stupid shit. But the reality is that this is what actual grifting looks like. I only ever lose viewers, lose subscribers from critiquing people with whom I have potential or actual audience overlap with. I do not benefit at all from doing it, and in fact, if I was financially motivated, what I would be doing is precisely what these guys are doing. I would be sucking up to Hasan Piker, I'd be sucking up to Chapo Trap House. Hey, 5 years ago I would have been sucking up to Vaush. Because the way that you build a big audience is by seeking those overlaps and being very careful not to rock the boat too much, and that I get as much audience overlap as possible and as many collaborations as possible with these sorts of people. Before finishing up, I want to quickly address by far the most common argument made by supporters of Platner, and of these sorts of Democratic Party primary candidates in general. You know the types, the AOCs and the Bernie Sanders of the world. It's some variation of, well, Platner is the best candidate running in this race. What's your alternative? Firstly, I don't think you genuinely believe that Platner actually has bad or objectionable views at all. Because if you genuinely thought that the least bad candidate in an election is an unrepentant, sadistic, tour mass killer of non-white people, advocating for better pay for mass killers like himself, then rather than advocating for voting for that guy, it would make way more sense for you to be so enraged by this state of affairs that you'd be taking drastic action to burn this whole thing down, or at the very least working long-term to create a viable alternative, rather than just putting all your weight behind people like this every 4 years and doing nothing else, and smugly telling others that they should just accept this and get behind this murderer. And that they aren't doing that alone shows that they really don't perceive this situation as being dire at all, and they aren't really uncomfortable with imperialism at all. Because if you believe in electoralism, then you believe that your vote is pretty much the only leverage that you have, and how easily you're willing to give it up says a lot about where you stand. Secondly, this is a circular logic which itself ensures there cannot be a better alternative. What do you expect us to do? We've only got two choices and we have to support one of them, is a stance that impedes the building of another option. Because if you always just obediently pick between whatever tripe you're served up, that means that you're never going to actually put in the effort, the time, the work to build something different, to make something concrete and long-lasting, to change the situation entirely. You need to make short-term sacrifices for long-term payoff. If not voting for this guy can even be called a sacrifice, which, I would argue it shouldn't be, like not supporting a proud imperialist mass murderer who wants to rebuild the US military in order to fight China and who wants to give people even more incentives than they already have to join. It will take time, sweat, blood, and tears to build a real, viable, long-term alternative. But if instead of doing that, everyone is just supporting the lesser evil, then obviously it's never going to happen, and you're still serving the interests of the ruling class just fine. So if a Nazi, mass-murdering imperialist like Graham Platner seems like the least bad option to you in an election, then you shouldn't be supporting him unconditionally while you roll your eyes smugly at anyone who tells you otherwise. You should be putting in the effort to change that, to actually do politics, rather than just sit there passively and take what you're given. Too many of you act like politics is just something that comes to you every 4 years with an election and a set in stone, by God, binary choice, divinely ordained, rather than something that with enough effort you can actually participate in and influence. You certainly owe it to the countless billions of people who live under the foot of American imperialism to at least try to do something different. In summary, they argue that they only have two choices. So what do you expect them to do when that sort of thinking is precisely what ensures that there's only two choices in the first place? And when instead of building something that actually aligns with what you claim to believe, you're just endlessly compromising what you believe, just for the sake of being able to say that you supported the guy who won an election, then you're not really winning the election anyway, are you? Because the candidate that you supported doesn't actually represent the beliefs that you started with. The point of politics isn't winning for the sake of winning. Otherwise, just go support Donald Trump. He wins a lot. It's winning to implement your politics. And if you have to practically entirely abandon your politics in order to win, then you didn't actually win, did you? the logic of these people goes, well, there's no alternative, so I have to vote for this guy. Then they always follow that up by explicitly arguing against trying to build an alternative because it would be too difficult or take too long to do so, or it just wouldn't work in the USA because the USA is exceptional and what works everywhere else could never work here. And there's always something being framed as an urgent threat that necessitates you voting for the supposed lesser evil every single election. And then they say again, well, there's no alternative, so I have to vote for this guy. And there's a certain point where it just becomes clear that they're not saying this because they actually believe that. They're saying this either because they don't actually care if there's an alternative or not, or they just plain don't want there to be one. And they support people like Graham Platner and everything that he stands for, but don't want to just outright say that because it would be quite distasteful to just say, I just don't really care that we kill millions of people worldwide. They do everything possible to ensure that an alternative cannot exist, and then they invoke the lack of existence of that alternative to justify their endless support of Democratic Party candidates, even to the extent that they will support murderers like Graham Platner. Now, I'm not under any illusion regarding the actual intent of the people who make these sorts of lesser evil arguments in situations like this. Most of them just don't care about imperialism, and only really care about getting benefits for themselves and people in their in-group. Platner claims he wants to do that for them, so that's why they're getting behind him. He's not a lesser evil for them at all, and that's why they have such an easy time abandoning whatever anti-imperialist veneer they might have had, and smugly act like it's ridiculous that anyone else even think about not just voting blue no matter who every single time. I'm under no illusions that I'm going to change the minds of any of these people. I'm just explaining to others how clearly stupid their arguments are, and the dishonesty of their intentions, because I don't know, maybe it will be useful for you in understanding where they're coming from and that you're just sort of wasting your time in engaging with them. And because I already know that pretty much all the negative comments on this video are going to be that argument or some variation of it, or people just saying purity testing, to refer to not wanting to uncritically support a Blackwater mercenary of 4 tours. They invoke that term like it's a magical spell. Just accept everyone, no matter what they stand for, no matter who they are, no matter what they did. Stand for absolutely nothing ever. So when you inevitably see comments like that, link them this timestamp right here and ask them how it feels to have had that argument preempted by an inanimate video. Actual left-wing politics are international. Afghans and Iraqis are equal human beings who are not to be sacrificed on the altar to cheaper Obamacare premiums for Americans. And it is sadly clear that a not insignificant number of Americans who consider themselves on the left, who even consider themselves anti-imperialists, do not actually believe this. But for you Americans who do believe that, consider this as a wake-up call. You occupy a position in the world that gives you uniquely high potential to fight this barbarity, much more than people anywhere else in the world. They can at best try to keep imperialism at bay in their own countries and regions, but you're in the center and thus have the potential to really strike at it at its source. So it's especially important that you guys do the opposite of advocating for complacency, for coddling what's considered normal among Americans, for positions that reinforce the American empire, normalize committing crimes for it, and encourage yet more others to do so, as the subjects of this video and many others do and have done. Che Guevara once famously said that the USA is the belly of the beast, because the people there have the most potential to fight imperialism. Much less famously, he also wrote about how the stark reality is that most Americans would never turn against it. With the North American reality being what it is, it's not difficult to suppose what will be the attitude of the working class of the North American country when imperialism is repulsed from its target nations and the problem of the abrupt loss of markets and sources of cheap raw materials is definitively posed. This is, in my opinion, the stark reality facing Latin Americans. In the final analysis, the economic development of the United States and the need of its workers to maintain their standard of living means that our struggle for national liberation is not waged against a given social regime, but rather against the whole nation, bound as a block by the ironclad supreme law of common interest over their domination of the economic life of Latin America. Let us prepare, then, to fight against the entire people of the United States, for the fruit of victory will not only be economic liberation and social equality, but the acquisition of a new and very welcome younger brother, the proletariat of the USA. That explains the reaction of much of the American left here. But I know that at least some of you are ready and willing to look beyond self-interest, especially in the shorter term, and you should be doing everything that you possibly can from within to bring about the fruit of victory that Guevara wrote about back then. Part of that is certainly discouraging people from joining the American military, promoting the perception of the victims of American imperialism as full and equal human beings, not tolerating their murderers, in fact, shaming them, making others not want to join, and not treating signing up to murder people as if it's just as normal as applying to work in like an auto manufacturing plant or something. I am beyond sick of the utterly disgusting way that self-labeled American progressives and leftists apologize for, normalize, and infantilize signing up to murder and help murder people for the American empire. And you should be too. And I hope this is a wake-up call for some of you. And just because I wanted to throw this part in somewhere, because it's just so ridiculous, I'm going to do it right here. When Bernie Sanders was approached for his opinion regarding Graham Platner's Nazi tattoo, along with other things like his post on Reddit doubting the veracity of sexual assault claims by women in the military, his response was, "Have you served 4 tours of duty? Sorry, you don't get to have opinion on a guy with a Nazi tattoo unless you've gone and murdered brown people on at least 4 separate occasions." This is what a lot of Americans believe. This is what Bernie Sanders, who for a long time fooled a lot of us into thinking he was our ally, legitimately believes. And we really, really need to change this. Not reinforce and normalize it. Thank you for watching. This video took a massive amount of work and effort to make, and it is undoubtedly going to result in me just losing a ton of subscribers from Americans who are offended at the notion that they shouldn't just massacre people for money, and fanatical fans of the people who I criticized here. Luckily, I'm able to make content like this regardless of that, thanks to my supporters on Patreon and Ko-fi, without whom it wouldn't be financially viable to do so. So if you'd like to support my work, consider heading over there and supporting me too. Now I'd just like to thank all of my supporters, and especially my $25 plus supporters: The Son of Sandy, S, Robocomi, Qualia, Pote, Lucian, Jackagora, Gel Cribson, Harold Summers, Goio, Firefox42, Ferris, Falafel Stand, Brosnan, Bobby Lasers, Geordie, and my $10 plus supporters. You can change your name: XXXX, the most anonymous, T Street, Support Libraries, Sender the Tanky, Pukey, Nola1, Natty Clark, Nabiru, Minijan, Megan Lowndes, Matthew Maharik, Manuel Kigel, Louis Bravo, Lorenzino, Kieran Goodwin, Can't Care Less, Kay, Jizdog, Jane, Jay, Hector Obregon, Happy Nephron, Handfigure, Gareth Miguel, Gabba Gundam 4444, Flashy, Eric MacDans, Eric Perkins, Eramis Goodspiel, Comrade Nat Boulay, Cockled Badger, Bounty, Bitchy Obama, Big Little Man 12, Bicep, Asma B, Alex, Agrif, Adrian Seares, Adrian Naku, Mira, Atuin, and the Empanada Brigades. Thank you for watching. See you all next time. Or for some of you, I won't ever see you again. And honestly, I'm fine with that.